Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today we have a hero call. We're going to be playing about 11,000 chips deep at 75-150 with a 25 ante. Falls around to a tight aggressive player in the hijack seat who opens to 400. And with pocket twos in the cutoff, I'm usually just calling. I actually don't think folding is insane because you typically have a tough time playing for all the money in today's environment. It's not like the past where if someone made top pair, they would just blast their stack in, no problem. So you're going to find that in today's games, you probably realize less implied odds than you did in the past. That said, I'm still going to call here, especially in live poker. This is from a $3,000 buy-in World Series of Poker event. And quite often we're going to see the pot multi-way, or see the flop multi-way, and it's going to go well enough. We're going to know if we have the nuts or not most of the time. So I do call. And everyone else folds, so we do see it heads up, but we're in position, so it's not the end of the world. And you're going to find that if you don't get 3-bet very often, this is very likely to be the outcome where you're going to call, and then sometimes the button calls, and if the button doesn't call, we're seeing the flop heads up in position. So, or if even three ways in position. It's not such a bad scenario. Now, if you think someone yet to act is going to 3-bet a lot, then sure, you should just fold the twos immediately. Anyway, flop comes 10-6-4, and the opponent checks. So when he checks here, very often he has either a medium strength made hand or just some garbage that he's planning to check fold, or maybe some sort of drawing hand he plans to check raise, like queen jack of clubs, but really I would just bet that if I was him. I don't do a ton of check raising, so it's often difficult for me to nail down what I think people are check raising with. So I'm not really thinking about that a ton, but maybe I should be a little bit more. Anyway, when he checks the flop, I think I can either bet or check. If I bet, I want to bet on the smaller side because betting on the smaller side protects our equity and allows our opponent to continue with some worse hands. Whereas if I bet something like 1,000 into the 1,200 pot, well, now my opponent's pretty much only going to call me when I'm beat. And that's not good because my pocket twos are essentially drawing dead. So I don't really want to bet big. I'm either going to check back or bet small, and I think either plays fine. If I was playing this hand today, I'd probably put out a small bet, just because our hand is so vulnerable to turn cards, because essentially any turn card is quite bad. So the turn's a 9 of diamonds. Now my opponent bets 600 into the 1,400 pot. Or sorry, into the 1,200 pot. And I decide to call. And I don't really know how I feel about this. I think I should probably just fold the turn, barring some sort of live read. But I mean, this hand would not have taken place without a live read, so here we are. I probably made some read that I thought my opponent did not have a great hand, or maybe I just thought he would be betting this turn a lot of the time with all sorts of stuff once I check back the flop. If our opponent's checking stuff like king-queen on the flop, he's very likely to bet this turn if the flop check through, just because he probably assumes he can't win it too easily at showdown, because when I check back, often I'm going to have at least some showdown value. So he should at least consider betting the turn and the river with some king high hands, maybe queen high hands. The problem, though, is that notice if he was looking to check call or check raise with 9-7, 8-7, or 9-8, all of those just got there with a pair, and our opponent may just value bet those on the turn. That said, if he value bets those on the turn, he probably won't value bet them again on the river. So I don't think we need to be too concerned about a double barrel. He may actually value bet them on this river that is a 10, though. So really, you have to ask yourself in this spot, what are you beating? We're mainly just beating king, queen, king, jack, and queen, jack that decided to check the flop and then bet the turn and then bet the river. And I think if they check the flop, they definitely will bet the turn and they bet the river. The problem is that a lot of those hands just bet the flop immediately because this board is at least reasonably dry. The flop is reasonably dry. So in order for me to call here, I think I probably do need some sort of a read that the opponent is weaker than normal. That said, he did only bet 1,100 into the 2,400 pot on the river, so it is a pretty small bet. I don't need to be right that often to justify calling, something like 22% of the time or so. So I don't hate the call. The main issue here is that I think the opponent could easily be value betting a 9, and well, I guess one good thing about this is that he may not be bluffing with a 6 or a 4. Those are hands that very often have showdown value. That said, you will find some good players who are sitting here with a hand like ace-4 of hearts. They decide to check the flop and then value bet the turn and then value bet the river somewhat thin. And against thin value bettors, you should definitely fold a lot of your junky bluff catchers because you're getting value owned by some pretty marginal hands. So definitely try to figure out what your opponent thinks about you. If they know that you're a calling station, well, then certainly you don't want to be playing as if you are a calling station. And if they think you're a nit and you're going to fold a lot of the time, well, then certainly you don't want to fold. So this time I believe I did look my opponent up. I did, and he had king, queen. So I imagine he was looking to check call the flop with king, queen of clubs on 10, 6, 4 with 2 clubs. And like I said, once he gets to the turn, I think betting the turn and the river are pretty mandatory, even though the river is not a great bluff card for him, just because now I should be somewhat inclined to hero call every time with a 9 or a 6. I probably don't have a ton of 9s or 6s in my range, and I may just bet a lot of 10s on the flop. So I probably got a little bit luckier that he did have one of these hands that he would elect to check the flop and then bluff with, but who knows? Maybe he takes this line very frequently with a lot of bluffs. If he did blast the river in this scenario, I actually still probably would have called, so he probably saved a little bit of money by betting smaller. So that's going to be it for this hand for PokerNews.com. If you enjoy this type of content, definitely check out my training site, PokerCoaching.com. There I have a ton of interactive hand quizzes as well as homework questions where I would, in this example, tell the student to go through and list the number of combinations of value hands and bluffs the opponent could potentially have, and take a look at them. And you'll probably see there actually are a lot of bluff hands. The real question, though, is will your opponent actually bluff with them? And that's very often the most difficult thing to figure out in poker, and that's why you have to pay attention to your opponents and adjust on the fly and not just play what you think is a very robotic strategy because you don't know how your opponent's going to play. And even if you try to assume they play perfectly, you're probably going to leave some money on the table because some people bluff frequently and some people bluff not so frequently. And if you're not adjusting to your opponents, you're not winning nearly as much as you could. So anyway, check that out at PokerCoaching.com. You can get a completely free 1-week trial. And that's going to be it for this week. Thank you very much, and I will talk to you next time.